Hey everybody, Jeff Tidwell here with another one of my tweet videos for you today. It is Saturday, November 23rd, 2019, and we're going to dive right back in with some tweets from the past, going back to March 2019, about 8 months ago, and we're going to get a little bit introspective, break things down, and talk a little bit about these tweets. Of course, as always, you can find me on Twitter at Real Jeff Tidwell. I'm also on Minds, Gab. Check out their free speech web browser, Gab Trends, as well as Dissenter, where you can leave a comment on any URL online. I'm also on Parler, Telegram, and Instagram. If you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like below and subscribe on both YouTube and BitChute. I would really appreciate that. If you don't like the content, well, meritocracy rules. Give me a downvote, really helps me with the algorithm. And if you really do like the content quite a bit, hit the little bell down below for notifications. If you find my cadence to be a little bit on the slow side, you can tap the 2x speed button and get all of the information in half of the time. Time, of course, is the currency, and that is double bang for your buck. So once again, welcome. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy. So we're going to start with a couple of named tweets. And we're going to talk a little bit about a topic that I have spoken of quite often on this channel, that being identity politics. But I won't dwell on this for too long because I do have a number of videos out there. A selection of modern religions, social justice is a modern religion, intersectionality and the road to hell, generating racism, more thoughts on generating racism, and several more, so definitely check those out. But we're going to start here with a tweet called The Same Page. The Same Page. Call it identity politics, an ideology of division for the purpose of achieving power. Call it intersectionality, equality through systematic otherism. Call it social justice, a modern religion promising moral virtue. Call it cultural Marxism. Call it collectivism. And of course, this tweet here has a second tweet, a sister tweet, which is also named, which is called systematic otherism. So we're going to read that tweet too, and then we're going to break it down. Call it identity politics, an ideology of division for purposes of gaining power. Call it intersectionality, or intersectional feminism. Equal outcomes via victim mentality. Call it social justice, a modern religion promising moral virtue. Call it cultural Marxism, or you can call it collectivism. Or I also sometimes use the phrase social Marxism, which is sort of the same thing. This is all about a form of social engineering, and I don't mean the type that you experience when a hacker tries to get your password at work, or that kind of social engineering. Actually, a friend of mine, we have been talking about this term, linguistically, what's a better way of, framing this? And I think cultural engineering is a better way to go. So what am I talking about here? If you're familiar with the channel, you know that we do talk a lot about individual agency and sort of individualism versus the group mentality, the groupthink mentality, the hive mind. We talked about it in my last video, and we've talked about it in the past. But let's start from the top here and just talk a little bit about this. So, identity politics is an ideology of division for gaining power. You pit two or more sides against each other, and you try to create friction that leads to certain outcomes that you desire. You may want to persuade the people in either of these groups or more. There is more than two, but for the purposes of this discussion, let's call it two. You pit them against each other, and you kind of incentivize them to see each other as the other, to see them as a foe, someone that could harm your chances at achieving opportunity or success. And then you say, well, you know, you don't want to be in a situation where that person has power. And these people, may they be politically aligned a certain way, religiously aligned, it could be occupational, it could be about immutable characteristics, which is the real problem when you're focusing on immutable characteristics that can't be changed and not focusing on the character of somebody, their merits and their flaws. You know, we really should be focusing on individuals, because you can't really judge anybody by the group or groups that they're a part of. That's part of my ideology and what I sort of preach on this channel, and I try to practice what I preach. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So intersectionality, some people call this fourth wave feminism. You have your first wave, your second wave, your third wave feminism, and your fourth wave. So, you know, intersectionality is a ideology where you split people up into groups. You look at them by immutable characteristics like race, sex, and, you know, things like gender, your ethnic background, you know, where you came from, the things you can't change, your skin tone, things like that. There's also mutable characteristics, things like occupation and religion and belief systems and other groups that you could find yourself associated with. But intersectionality purports to cast those in the majority or in a position of any kind of what they call privilege as the oppressor, and then you have the oppressed. So if you have a situation where one group has a bit of an advantage because of maybe numbers or maybe anything else, whatever it might be, the situation, you know, geographically, geologically, there's so many different cases where people may have some kind of advantage. If they live in the city versus the country, there's different advantages to both. And of course, with immutable characteristics, you can look at, you know, male, female. You can look at people that are trans or gender fluid and just look at things that, you know, make their lives easier or harder in different contexts. But again, it's all very contextual and largely subjective. And no two people are alike. We have 7 billion people on this earth, and we all have our own perspectives. We all have our own preferences. And largely, we all have something called in-group preference. So intersectionality seeks to achieve equality and equity, which are virtuous things. They are altruistic things. But it does this through systematic otherism. So creating others and saying, well, you're in this group, and this group. And how are those three groups oppressed by other groups? And it's not about focusing on individual situations, but just sort of looking at the group and going, well, X group oppresses Y group. And there's sort of a set belief on what those groups should be. And of course, different intersectionalists, as some people call them, will find that they have their own in-group preference for certain sex, S-E-C-T-S, of that group. We've seen the feminists, we've seen trans advocates, LGBTQ+, people from all different sides going at each other regarding their immutable characteristics. So there is friction between all different kinds of groups, and these ideologies seek to foster an awareness and perhaps even a persuasion to push against others. Thus, I call it altruistic otherism. You may call it altruistic sexism, altruistic racism. And when I talk about generating racism, well, this is a little bit of what we're going to be diving into. I also frame it as a modern religion. And when we talk about this, I mean social justice. Social justice is a modern religion, a system of real-world moralism in which people can achieve moral virtue and universal truth while redirecting their hatred, their irrational hatred as human beings, in the process. So disciples of the modern religion of social justice will say, you're in this group, a mutable characteristic, your skin tone, and because of your skin tone, you are privileged, you are the oppressor, and you must be taken down a peg. But I ask the question often in my videos, asking questions of the disciples of the modern religion of social justice and censorship in other modern religions. I ask, when does the tide turn? When does the inertia meet its counterforce? Right? When do you pull back? When does the crusade end? And you realize the war is over and you move in the other direction. When does the oppressed become a form of oppressor? These are the kind of questions we need to ask when people are proselytizing to a modern religion. Like, what is the virtue of this? How does this benefit the greater good, the people? And how does this benefit me? And am I being oppressed? Or is there a point where it's no longer really virtuous, but it's just becoming mean, or there's another form of situation going on? So it promises moral virtue. People that are moralists, and they may not be non-secular, they may not have a religion like Christianity or Islam, they may be devoutly secular, and yet they find this moral code, this system, in which they can achieve moral virtue. They can virtue signal, and they can try to enact a form of real-world moralism. And that gives them dopamine, that gives them a feeling of meaning, purpose, order, and worth. And that's, there are benefits to it. I'm agnostic on the modern religion that is social justice. And of course, when we talk about social justice, people say, well, how can you oppose social justice? And I say, well, again, just as we were talking about cultural engineering and social engineering, this term social justice means different things to different people. In some way, you can look at social justice as simply achieving a form of, equity, that people are treated equally. All men are created equal, all women and all people, humankind, peoplekind, are created equal. We should be treated by how we interact with the world, what our merits and flaws are, what our character is. Our individual agency should not be undermined. That is my philosophy on that. And yet, that's social justice. That's giving people the positive liberty they need to succeed. But then you have social justice, which is, when you talk about social justice warriors, you're talking about a specific collectivist, group-minded ideology. It's a very specific thing we're talking about. I usually capitalize it and call it a modern religion, frame it that way so that people can understand the difference between lowercase social justice and uppercase the modern religion. So some people refer to this as cultural Marxism or social Marxism, and again, a Marxist scholar may disagree with how I'm characterizing Marxism. Definitely seek subject matter experts and leave me a comment below with your thoughts and observations on how the use of the word Marxism is involved with cultural Marxism. But essentially it's the same sort of placing people into groups. Marx, in some of his teachings, would place people into class groups and say, well, the rich, the bourgeois, versus the poor. I believe they call them the proletariat, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. And he separated people into groups and looked at them that way. And on this channel, we preach individuality. So, and naturally, I like to look at people for their own contribution. What they bring to the table, good, bad, neutral, and in between. And of course, there's the collective, and then there's the individual. So you have collectivism and individualism. And of course, thinking in absolutes is a fool's errand, so you don't want to get too bogged down in labels. Of course, you don't want to cast somebody a certain way and say it's absolute. These postmodern ideologies, it's not great when they mix with an absolute world, because they they sort of purport that everything is a construct and we can sort of design reality as we see fit. And of course, if you go too far down that road, you let the inertia take you all the way, well, you reach a place called clown world. So collectivism, there are some benefits and there are some costs to thinking with a group-minded ideology, a view of the world, a perspective. And there are many benefits to having self-esteem, individual agency, and viewing yourself as an entity that can make choices and doesn't have to be guided by the associations. Or, you also have guilt by association, guilt by conversation. You're in this group, so you must or must not do this thing. I try to dissuade people from that notion. So systematic otherism, and again, it's all for good intentions, and like I say, good intentions pave the road to somewhere. I have a video, Intersectionality and the Road to Hell, so maybe it paves it to the road to hell, the yellow brick road all the way down. So there's not really much more to say on this. I've spoken at length about it, and I will continue to. With that, we can move on to the next tweet. Just like to make sure that everyone is seen as unique individuals and we all have the same level of opportunity and respect for one another, and we appreciate the differences we have because everybody views things through their own window, their own, vision of what the world is. We have our, sort of subjective inner world, and we have the outer world, which is more objective, but it's not quite all the way there. We don't really, there are some things in this world that can be, are simply unknown. I say the truth is unknowable because ultimately we all have our own perspective, and so it's hard to come to a consensus. And when you're talking consensus, especially in science, it is a bit of a dicey prospect because sometimes people can fall in with confirmation bias and they can just follow the modern religion of institutions and go with the experts without thinking, without putting reason on it. They can place faith over reason, and that can cause, over time, some issues. So my next tweet here is about voting. The Democrat Party is pushing to create 16-year-old voters. The voting bloc with the least wisdom currently is 18 to 24. So they want to go from 18 to 16, some of them. I know that Ayanna Pressley might have been talking about that, but you can correct me in the comments section below with your thoughts. Your thoughts, observations, accolades, and criticisms. So this idea of creating 16-year-old voters, my belief, and you can search for my beliefs, my positions on voting, and many other things by going to Twitter and putting in Real Jeff Tidwell, my position on, in the search bar, and that will bring you to my positions at this time about a number of the key issues, wedge issues, important things, and how I generally view different situations and different elements of our society, different questions. And I say the voting age should be 18. If you can go into the Army at 18, you should be able to vote on whether we should elect politicians that may or may not be hawks or doves, and that really does, our society does need to keep this democracy going and make sure that people that have skin in the game have a voice. So 16-year-old voters, I don't think so. I don't think so, Tim. As Al Borland on Home Improvement might have said. Home Improvement reference for your Saturday. And as Scott Adams says, you can check him out on Twitter. Scott Adams says, at Scott Adams says, and he has a YouTube channel, Real Coffee with Scott Adams. He says that young voters are the dumbest voters, and it's true. You haven't lived long enough to develop a larger perspective. Now, there is no specific age. or knowledge level that makes you an eligible voter. It's 18 in the United States, 18 years of age. But in this world, there are certain patterns over time that we recognize as we get older, and we learn more and we see more. We understand more about our environment, more at 40 than at 20, for example. And so some people have suggested that we change the voting age to 25 or 35. I've heard advocates for all of these different things. And I think it should remain at 18, okay? And this doesn't count for other things. This is just in the context, just in the box about voting for the president and for the government, municipal, whatever it might be. I think you should be able to vote in your representatives at 18. So the least wisdom, and 18, some people say, is too young. And, well, again, we have situations like, what's the drinking age? What's the smoking age? We have the vaping debate going on. Should it be 18 or should it be 21? There's a lot of different questions about these different situations. And hey, why can't I rent a car until I'm 25, right? There's all these different things, but personally, I don't like the idea of more naive, less worldly people voting in general. And of course, we have a cutoff, and I don't think we should argue with that. And I also do believe that felons and criminals and people in the prison system, for whatever reason, should maintain their right to vote. I'm pretty solid on that. Not such a fence sitter as I am on many other issues. But I don't think that 16 is knowledgeable and experienced enough really to really have the understanding to make an informed choice. And there are people when they were younger. I'm 35, by the way. When I was younger, I was much more impressionable. And I didn't understand the workings of the world, the machinations of the media as they spread propaganda and try to proselytize and persuade in any given direction, may it be left or right or anywhere in the political sphere, however they'd like to do it. I wasn't knowledgeable. And over time, we gain more knowledge, we become more experienced, and you start to see the patterns, you recognize, your pattern recognition picks up the bullshit, the things that don't make sense. They might seem contradictory, but sometimes contradictions are just situations where you don't have enough knowledge. You haven't seen enough of the information required to call it just a situation and not a contradiction. So if you'd like more on this, check out my video about young voters. I don't recall the name of it right now. It's a message to young voters talking about the different systems used, the different techniques and tactics used to persuade. Just do a search for Jeff Tidwell, Young Voters on YouTube or BitChute. Definitely check me out there. All right. Onward and upward. I love the musician Bill Callahan. Saw him earlier this year at the Sinclair in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the show was rad as fuck. He has this amazing baritone voice, and he puts up these kind of cute observations on Twitter. So Bill Callahan went on Twitter and he's like, I'm starting my Twitter account. And then like 3 minutes later, he's like, this was a bad idea. No, Bill, it wasn't a bad idea. I really appreciate your work. Tweets. So last week we did a segment called Electioneer, and we'll do another Electioneer now, talking about politics. Electioneer, integrity in electoral politics. A, pitching the truth in a post-truth environment. B, keeping promises, following mandates. And then I go on to talk about another part of electoral politics, unity, the idea of unity. Unity in electoral politics. With it, the ideological fringe loses, but the party can win. Without it, the fringe wins and the party schisms. Okay, so we are coming into the U.S. presidential election in 2020. The incumbent, Donald Trump, for the Republican side, and then we have a large plethora, about 10 or 15 candidates on the Democratic side, including, but not limited to, Kamala Harris, Tulsi Gabbard, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg. I think I got that right. Pete, if you're watching, leave me a comment below with the correct pronunciation of your name. We also still have Cory Booker, Julian Castro, as well as Andrew Yang and Amy Klobuchar, among others. Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg, who just spent $30 million on ads. Good luck, 77-year-old Michael Bloomberg. I hope you do well. We haven't heard much about Marianne Williamson lately. But let's talk about integrity, because notably Bernie Sanders, as well as a few others, have talked a little bit about integrity and trying to be principled. And Bernie says, in 2016, I was a bit more of a Bernie supporter. Now I run a Trump-positive channel and a Trump-positive mindset. I support the sitting president in any way that I can, and I really do appreciate all the good things he's done. And we try to point out the bad things he's done as well, because you can't really have a complete opinion without a cost and a benefit. So there are some costs and there are some benefits, but because the world is so full of people talking about the costs of his presidency, some rational, some irrational, we focus primarily on the benefits. But of course I will call him out when he makes a mistake. So when you talk about pitching the truth in a post-truth environment, politics is a post-truth realm. Check out my video, Politics is a Post-Truth Realm, for more on that. And so you have a world of hyperbole and false promises and framing things a certain way that benefits their argument, persuades in a specific direction or another. And that goes for both sides, all sides. However you'd like to frame the political sphere or the political compass, it is this is a universal truth about the truth in the post-truth environment, where you have integrity. They say, well, you did what you said you were going to do. Well, we should want our politicians to do what they say they're going to do, right? But so often you have situations where somebody will promise 10 of something and then deliver 8. Is that a lie? You'll have situations where somebody makes a bit of a big ask. Hey, why don't we get free college and free health care and giant tax raise for the more wealthy that are job creators? How about we do all these things and also have the better foreign policy and no more wars and raise the minimum wage and give everybody a job? These are all beautiful ideals. They're beautiful big asks, things to aspire to, just like a deity. You know, you need a greater power. You need something to aspire to. You can't be looking down. You don't aim down in a negotiation. You aim up. You make a bigger ask, and then you pull it back to be pragmatic and to get what you want, to compromise. You start big, compromise later. That's good negotiation. So you have two ways to go: pitching the truth in a post-truth environment, and then there's B, the integrity of keeping promises and following mandates. Now, if someone has a mandate, say, for example, if a president were to win about 80 or 90% of the counties in the United States, well, you'd say, well, to some degree, if that president were, say, for example, President Trump, and he says, build a wall, fortify our border security, make sure that illegal and unsavory people are not encouraged to come to our country, just like any other country. It's a bit of a nationalistic stance, and I do consider myself to be a nationalist, America first. But, again, that's a mandate. People want security. They want job security. They don't want people coming over the border just willy-nilly and taking their jobs, okay, whatever those jobs may they be blue collar, white collar, or other. Then you had Barack Obama, President Obama, who said, we have to fix our healthcare system. So he brought in something called Romney Care. Well, he called it Obamacare. There's some slight differences. And initially, he even had this great idea. Well, I think it's a pretty decent idea because I enjoy choice. The public option. The public option, which of course was then removed in Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act was pushed through. So him following that mandate of, changing the world of healthcare, for better or for worse, he did change it. You have to do something. It might be a mistake. Hey, you might be applying Cunningham's Law. Check out my video on Cunningham's Law for more on that. You might be applying Cunningham's Law and getting it a little bit wrong, and then allowing yourself the openness to change, to adjust to what people's feedback might be, and to learn. So that there is that part of integrity, doing what you say you're going to do. So there's that. There's two different ways you can go, talking about the truth in a post-truth environment and actually following through. Because you can say you're telling the truth, we're telling the truth, and then you can kind of frame it just the way you want. Well, objectively, someone said this, so now we can say that that's the truth objectively. An expert or someone that's on my team said that it's this way or that way, and now we're going ahead and we're going to say, well, we must move forward. This is objectively moral. This is the right thing to do. Do no harm. We're going to go there. And it's a matter, sometimes it's very subjective, like who is benefiting, where are the costs located. It's when you talk about the truth in a world where people just constantly talk in what they call weasel words. The world of politics is a world of weasel words. May, could, should. And someone we're talking about the impeachment of 2019, the impeachment saga surrounding Donald Trump. Well, I overheard some hearsay from two people that I don't even know that well, and they were told by somebody else that the president did something bad. What's the truth? What is the truth? Is it knowable? Is it unknowable? But in politics, people just say things, they make statements, and then if they're questioned, they might say no comment. If they're backed into a corner, it's a post-truth realm, folks. Politics is a post-truth realm. So onward to unity. Because when you talk about unity, there are these different groups, subgroups, within the left and the right. Of course, left and right, a false dichotomy, very arbitrary, where you draw that line. A lot of us have the same goals, but different systems, as Scott Adams would frame it. Like the right, for example, is not looking to do things that much differently in the end. They want the same things, success. They want prosperity. They want liberty, positive and negative for all, as does much of the left. Not everybody. You have authoritarians here, and you have authoritarians there, but again, unity in electoral politics. With it, the ideological fringe loses, but the party can win. So when you have unity, the majority, you go with the majority. You go with the majority. Inside the Democrat Party, there is this large question right now. Are you going to be more further left? Or are you going to come to the center, to this more neoliberal? Are you going to be a bit of a Marxist, a bit of somebody that's into the socialistic world of economics? Or somebody that's more of a neoliberal that embraces capitalism a bit more and does apply regulation? This is a controlled economy. You talk about socialism. If you're going absolute socialism, it's a very controlled economy. Do you want a less controlled one that's more corporation friendly? And is there any form of socialism that goes into that? Are you giving welfare to corporations? So there's all these different questions. Largely, it's the economy, stupid. That's what people tend to decide what kind of politics they like, depending on how well they're doing. If they don't have a job, if they don't have any prospects, if they don't have any opportunity, if they are treated unfairly, they will not feel great. They'll want somebody they can change that. So when somebody like Donald Trump comes out, or Bernie Sanders, an economic populist, and says, well, the people deserve to choose, the people deserve to have more rights, more control, they deserve unions, they deserve a higher wage, a living wage. These are great goals. But capitalism, in my mind, is the system to get there. But of course, thinking in absolutes is a fool's errand, so you can't go all the way in a capitalistic direction. There must be a counterforce, and that is called regulation, that keeps it in check, keeps balance. Balance is the goal. But of course, when you're talking about unity, people say, well, we don't want to give up on our principles. We don't want to come into the bigger Democrat Party tent or Republican Party tent. There's different factions here. In the Republican Party, you have some people that are a bit more traditional conservative or evangelo-con, maybe even neocon. Maybe you want more war and you're into this whole thing about giving corporations money, however you'd like to define these terms. And then you have your more libertarian side, the people that enjoy positive and negative liberty. They want to be left alone. They want the rights. They might be more constitutionalists. They want to be treated with the utmost freedom possible while maintaining an ordered society. Because, of course, with freedom comes chaos. Those two are linked. In order, you have control. It's a balancing act, folks. Just one big balancing act. So without unity, the fringe wins and the party schisms. So you get people that go and say, Bernie or bust, or they vote for the Green Party, or they vote for the Libertarian Party, and they take votes away from this dualistic system. They take votes away from the dualistic sides of Democrat and Republican. Which is a good thing. I think that we need to have choice. We need to be able to choose what we're voting for, who we can vote for. I advocate for, I don't. This label is hard to accept because you have your capital L and your lowercase l. But libertarian beliefs, I consider myself a bit of a left libertarian with a penchant, a love for capitalism. But, without unity, the fringe wins, because ultimately they really stick it to the side that they're on, the general side that they're on. When you look at, like, the Libertarian Party over here, when people that don't want to vote Republican, because there's a libertarian aspect to Republican, or right now in 2019, if they don't want to vote Republican, they might vote Libertarian, taking votes away from the Republicans. And the Democrats are trying to embrace progressivism. I do have a video, Word Thinking, Reactionary and Progressive, that you can check out with my thoughts on the word progressivism and how it's applied today. But then you have, of course, the progressives, and then you have the general big tent Democrat Party, your Joe Bidens and Barack Obamas. And then over here you have Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard, sort of what some may consider to be more to the left of those other individuals. More to the left of President Clinton, Bill Clinton. There will never be another President Clinton, most likely. I don't think Chelsea can make it. And Hillary Clinton was one of the worst presidential candidates in history. So I doubt that she'll run again. I don't think that's going to happen. But the party will schism, of course. Some people are going in this direction of Bernie or bust, or they're saying, well, I need to have these principles, talking about integrity as well. I need them to have these principles or else I'm not voting. My morale is gone. And then you have people on the other side as well, the same thing. You have Republicans that are never Trump. I don't want to vote for Trump. If you're going to be, and they also have their beliefs as far as it comes to libertarianism. They want to abolish the Fed, or they have these other beliefs that are just not in that mainstream, traditional, conservative Republican tent. So there might be schisms, but the fringe will win ultimately. Each election, these third parties, they get stronger and stronger, and I do support that. But I see the friction. We do have people in the media talking about how, oh, Jill Stein is a Russian agent. Russia, Russia, Russia. Moscow, Putin, Kremlin, Tulsi Gabbard, Jill Stein, Roger Stone, Trump Tower, Putin, Russia, Trump. There is this whole thing where it's easy for the media to cast these people as villains, as the other, as the enemy, because they have the chance, there is this incentive there, they have a chance to schism and hurt the team they're on. They have a chance to hurt the Democrats or the Republicans. And of course, everybody is incentivized to fight for their team. They're incentivized by money. And if they're principled, it's ideology. Ideology. So, next tweet for you today. Yeah, I do support third-party candidates. I do. But I understand, the world of useful idiocy. Sometimes somebody might be principled, but in the optics world, the persuasion and post-truth world that is politics, being principled can be a disadvantage. I hate to say that. I like to be a principled person and stick to my guns and try to speak as objectively and as truthfully as possible, but ultimately, a lot of people just take one look at something or a number of just cursory glances and they make a decision. They're thinking optically. They're not thinking rationally. They're thinking irrationally. We are irrational beings. We make irrational choices and then we rationalize them later. So, a lot of it is optics. Perception over reality. And it's important to remember that. Everything is political. Things I imagine are scrawled on Satan's face. All right, so we have another named tweet for you today. It's called Feels Good. Feels good. We seem to choose the version of reality that's most comfortable for the brain to construct or lean on. Cognitive dissonance serving as a protective layer, maintaining sanity as we're exposed to multiple realities at once. Echo chambers are candy for our minds. So I've talked about this at length, that I believe echo chambers should be a vacation home and not a permanent home. They should be someplace where you go to rest and to attain comfort, to rest your brain from all the debating and all the, having to exercise your cognitive dissonance muscles. I do have a video, cognitive dissonance workout routine. Definitely check that out for more on that. But you're exercising your cognitive dissonance muscles, finding new information, assimilating new information, challenging your confirmation bias. This can be very cognitively taxing. So I say it's good to have an echo chamber someplace where people agree with you generally. You can still have debate, you can still have disagreement, you can have dialogue, but it's a little bit more friendly. It's not butting heads, socialism versus capitalism and things like that. It's good to have, to live more in the world of dialogue and then retreat to a world where everybody's echoing your opinion. So we seem to choose the reality. We seem to choose the version of reality that's most comfortable for the brain to construct or lean on. So it's really hard to always be in a state of, I guess you could say cognitive flux, where you have all these contradictions. You have to pick a path. You can't, when you're going through the A-B pathfinding, oftentimes it's fun to sit on the fence when it's a complex issue. Like if you think that you have a definitive answer for a complex issue, well, the chances are you're probably wrong. There's probably more complexity there. There's probably more options there and variance in what the correct solution could be. There may be multiple correct solutions that have different varying degrees of success and different pros and cons, costs and benefits. But we do choose the most comfortable path, the path of least resistance, very often. A very narrow path sometimes that helps us to at least, accept what's going on. Like we're not constantly challenged. We have a path to walk along, a guide. We have a guide to go forward. Now, I'm not saying this is ideal. It's just the way that our brains work. We don't need to be in constant pain. We like to avoid cognitive stress. We'd like to avoid cognitive pain. And sometimes I actually use it as a marker, an indicator of when I do want to dig deeper. When I'm in a mood to seek information, and I do believe that all information, more information is better, as much information as you can get. I am pro-information. That's why I believe we need an Internet Bill of Rights where people can exercise their free speech, they can exercise it, and not fall prey to the modern religion of censorship. But we do need some place to lean, we need some place to rest. And the version of reality that's most comfortable is where we do that. Now, cognitive dissonance actually serves as a protective layer. We set up cognitive walls. Check out my video about cognitive walls, and I talk a little bit more about this concept of having these mental walls. You don't think about the cow while you're eating a hamburger. You don't think about the bloodshed. You don't think about all the uncomfortable and unsavory things that go into your reality to make it possible. You just think about the good, what's happening, the comfortable reality of you just got a nice double cheeseburger, you're enjoying it, it's got pickles, lettuce, tomato, mayo, ketchup, whatever you might like. You're loving it. You're not thinking about the slaughterhouse. You're not thinking about the dark side of the reality that you enjoy. So cognitive dissonance, bouncing these ideas off that seem contradictory or that seem to, conflict with our confirmation bias and our understanding of the world, it is a protective layer because we need to have a place where we need to have a screen, we need to have a bit of a block to make sure that we maintain at least the reality we have. If you get overwhelmed with all the billions upon trillions of possibilities in the world, and really with our world of rational free will, you don't really have that many options, ultimately. Irrational free will, when we get into postmodernism and thinking as an irrational human being, yeah, the options really open up, but really there's only so much you can do when you're locked to this physical body. But this protective layer maintains sanity as we are exposed to multiple realities at once. We're exposed to other people's perception of reality that they communicate. May it be through media or just directly to you. They'll tell you about what they believe reality is. And if they're a bad person and their intentions are bad, if they're using bad intentions and they're trying to confuse you, they call it gaslighting. Gaslighting is when somebody is lying to you and their intent is to create a false reality. Okay? Gaslighting isn't when somebody is just looking at things in a different window than you are, through a different window. Their window on the world is different from your window on the world. They see things differently. They have different preferences. They have different biases. They're not necessarily trying to hurt you or confuse you. They're just speaking something that seems counterintuitive to you. So we are exposed to multiple realities at all times. Different people have their own inner reality, and then there's the outer reality we all share. And echo chambers are candy for our minds. The dopamine and the serotonin don't stop. The cortisol's low, the dopamine's high. We are so happy when people are agreeing with us. Like, pacing is a big part of persuasion, right? Agreeing with people. And people are saying, well, you're right. And, oh, you're so on point. And that's incredible. That's insightful. That's informative. And that's good. And then you leave the echo chamber. You leave that comfortable space, that safe space. And you go out into the larger world and you see, well, oh my God. There are so many different perspectives here. There are so many different views. And which ones are right and which ones are wrong. And which ones fall between. It can be overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. So we sometimes just go back into our chamber, we go back to our house, sit in our bed, and look at our computer and go, well, I feel good about this, I'm happy. And echo chamber, hearing that you're correct, that all of your beliefs are right, is, well, it makes you feel good. It's a good way to start. But in this world, we should be open-minded. We should have openness. In my mind, this is my persuasion, this is my philosophy, we should have openness to experience, as Jordan Peterson talks about. So, candy is tasty, but is it good for you? Great question. Leave me a comment below with your thoughts and observations on that. So we're going to do 2 more tweets for you today. Hope you're enjoying the video. I am enjoying delivering the material. I'm just going to say this tweet because this one here, I don't have any of the answers. But it's kind of fun to think about. So leave me a comment below with your thoughts on this. This is a named tweet. It's called, circular reasoning. Circular reasoning. Maybe we will talk about it a bit. I may have done some circular reasoning in this video, or maybe not. Circular reasoning. Question 1. What's the connection between our inability to precisely calculate pi, because it's been done to over 1 trillion decimals, and quantum physics? What is the connection between our inability to precisely calculate pi and quantum physics? Question 2. Is there a universe or dimension where pi is calculable? And question 3. How does everything is a circle? Everything is a circle hold up? And I put this tweet up for Pi Day. Pi Day 2019. So let's talk about it just a little bit. So the first question is, what's the connection between our inability to calculate pi precisely, and quantum physics? Now, quantum physics is a complicated area. I am not a scientist. Well, I might be a social scientist, but I am not I'm not a physics expert. I am not a scientist of physics. So I know that the world of quantum physics is complicated, and there are some areas that are less defined than others. There are some places where people have confusion over terms. You have things that are more observable and things that aren't. Things such as entanglement. People tend to agree there's entanglement going on. There's a large consensus around that, but there's other things like the way that waveforms break down. There's different questions. Different scientists are performing the scientific method, and they're coming to different conclusions about that. One scientist says this, another says that, and the truth lies most likely somewhere in between, right? So I don't really have much knowledge on that. You'll need to seek subject matter experts on the actual math and the physics, the nuts and bolts of that. But these are good questions. I once heard Stephen Hawking, the famous scientist, say, it's not his place. As he got older in his life, he said, it's not my place to be running point, to be at the edge of discovery and exploration of our universe. But it's now a time where I feel content, and I'm paraphrasing here, asking questions, asking important questions, so that the up-and-coming young, bright scientists of the world can answer them. That they have a goal, they have questions to answer, they have, new frames of reference, new paths to travel epistemologically, and to perform the scientific method and to search and to try to find the answers to these pressing questions that I or Stephen Hawking or anyone else might present. So I don't know the answer to what that connection may be, but I believe there is something to that. Precisely calculating pi and quantum physics, because quantum physics, of course, you have, people look at things from two different vantage points and they see something different. Reality appears different. And so people are wondering, just how random is it, and can it be? We have quantum computing. Can it be harnessed? Can this power be harnessed to do new things? And then we have to ask, because there are other things too, like the multiverse, multiple world theory. Is there a universe or dimension where pi is calculable? We can't do it here. It doesn't seem we can do it. Over 1 trillion decimals is quite a lot. So, is there a dimension? Are there other dimensions? Is there another universe where, well, maybe it's not just 3D or 4D, there isn't just time and space-time, but maybe there's other dimensions. Okay, I believe some people say there are 10, some people say there are more. Then you get into meta dimensions and all these different things. It makes you wonder, is there a universe or dimension where pi is calculable? And then you say, well, question number 3, how does everything is a circle hold up? Now, a lot of our systems in this world, on this planet, the mortal plane that is Earth, the human beings that observe it, we have a lot of things in this world that feel circular. They have a cycle to them. Moralism, for example. Only 15 years ago, common sense was a different thing. Common sense means something different to every generation, to every situation. So, moralism, it seems, when we're talking about just the United States, 15 years ago you heard a whole lot, and the moralists are still there, but you heard a whole lot from the right, the evangelicals, about what you should and shouldn't do. There was moral panic about this, satanic panic, and heavy metal, marijuana. Marijuana is effectively legal in the United States now, by the way. It's effectively legal. If they're not enforcing it much on a federal level, well, it's effectively legal. It's more of a state issue. And I do believe that when the time comes, we should take marijuana off of Schedule 1, where it doesn't really belong. But we have moralism that runs in circles. So before, it was more the right, or the conservatives, saying, hey, prophets of the modern religion of censorship, you are correct. We should silence people and find moral virtue and universal truth by removing voices from the discussion. And now it seems that the left is more authoritarian on this. Maybe it's because the left has taken over culture a little bit more. Popular culture is a little bit more liberal, as it were. But there's this talk, people think that it's moralistic, it's helping the world to silence people, to remove their right of freedom of speech. And they might even go and say, well, freedom of speech is defined in the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America, and that's all the free speech is. It's not a larger philosophical concept. No, for the purposes of my argument, if the government isn't infringing on your free speech, well, it's just fine. Anybody else that wants to infringe on your right to speak, to make your voice known, to make your opinion known, to make your views known, just peachy. That's why I'm a bit agnostic on the modern religion that is censorship. I believe that all voices matter, and yes, there are limits to free speech. There are limits, credible threats, doxing, you have slander, libel, defamation. You have unconsented pornography, situations of direct harm, crying, fire in a crowded theater. There are places where we have to decide as a society, well, enough is enough. You're kind of causing a problem here. People are getting hurt. There is a moral issue here. What's happening is immoral. We do have situations like that, but I like to err on the side of free speech absolutism. You'll hear me talk about that a lot on this channel. But just speaking of moralism, everything is a circle. Everything is a circle. What goes around comes around, because every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So there is this, and that generally holds true. Generally holds true. That there are forces and counterforces. There are, positive, negative. There's balance in this world. There's a balance to things. Some people call it karma. There's also karma. There's all these different ways you can frame reality. Some of it's superstitious, some of it irrational, but other parts are quite rational and logical. Just don't take that from somebody that has rational or logical in their username. You may have a bad time. So these are good questions. How does everything is a circle hold up? There are so many things in this world that are running in a circular pattern. Perhaps everything is a circle. Perhaps it isn't. Let me know in the comments section below. So, one more tweet for you today. Mental health is the deciding factor in mass shootings. Absolutely. You can certainly check out my video, Orange Man Hitler, and my position on guns for more information on how I feel about the gun debate. I am pro Second Amendment and more. So we'll finish up today with a little on the modern religion known as global warming. Just want to get to this one here. So I hashtagged this tweet Climate Strike back in March. We only have history recorded by the winners to assess the situation prior to our birth. Prophets of global warming persuade youth by saying they'll pay the cost for our carbon sins when the prophecy is fulfilled. Youth crave agency, but lack wisdom. Convenient. So, once again, we started earlier in this video talking about how the Democrat Party wanted to add 16-year-old voters to the rolls and say, well, you're 16, you can vote. The thing is, though, the Democrat Party also has this thing they like to persuade around called climate change. And they have people all across the world, the UN, all across the world, the globalists. They have Greta Thunberg, and they have other people out there, Michael Mann and all these different people, scientists, advocates. They have dancers in the street. They have academics, of course, institutions is a modern religion where you have academia, media, and state. And so people in academia, media, and state on the Democrat side are persuading, they've made it a wedge issue, they've made it a dividing line. You're in the world of identity politics once again, you're either a believer, a disciple of the modern religion that is global warming, or you are a climate denier. You are in denial. The truth is so clear, and yet it eludes you. You're denying it. You know it's true. You know it's true. The sky is falling. The seas are rising. Now again, I have a video, Global Warming is a Modern Religion, in which I do talk a little bit more about my perspective when it comes to how to handle energy, how to handle the climate issue, and where I fall in terms of the persuasion on this topic. But again, I have knowledge. I grew up in the 90s. I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, and I know that there were things such as the ozone layer scare. The ozone layer has a hole in it. And then they said, well, Manhattan's going to be underground. It's going to be underground by the year 2014. And they said so many things that didn't really come true. They said there was a peak oil. There was not going to be any more oil. And then we started fracking, hydraulic fracking. We found more oil. Now, oil doesn't seem to have any problem in terms of abundance. It's almost everywhere. It's in the United States. It's in North America, South America. It's all across the world. In many places, and a lot of different countries continue to use coal and natural gas. Fossil fuels aren't going anywhere. But of course, if you listen to the prophets of the modern religion that is global warming, they will proselytize and say, well, if you don't do something in 8, 9, 10 years, and they'll say, of course, 30 years from now, and 2080, and by 2080 or 2100, the GDP of the United States might be 10% lower, which you wouldn't even notice because it's 10% over time. If you don't have a solid number, it's a moving target. And of course, postmodern ideology is all about moving targets, of course. You don't really know what you have. You just have this sort of faith that, my God, if we don't do something, I might be a bad person. I might have made a mistake. I might not have merit. This might be just a flawed decision if I don't do something. If I don't start eating bugs, or stop having children, or stop eating meat in general, because cows produce methane, and CO2, carbon dioxide, is a pollutant. It doesn't green the earth. Plants don't eat it for food. I mean, there's so many different ways you can look at this situation and say, well, hold on. You're only telling me about the costs. You're not referring to the benefits of the situation. You're not explaining clearly. Now, it is on the alarmists, on the climate alarmists, to persuade me to them, because they're taking a position on something. Like I say, for example, as an agnostic to climate change, and again, I understand that the oceans may be rising or falling, or the temperature may be rising or falling, there may be global warming or global cooling. On a long enough time scale or timeline, you could make all kinds of statements that are objectively or subjectively true. And it's like the modern religion of statistics as well. It's all very confusing because you can frame things in a way that makes them true or untrue depending on how you look at it, how long of a time scale you're looking at, and what the targets are. And if you point to specific, you appeal to anecdote and make specific anecdotal references to different specific parts of the world. I mean, generally speaking, I am agnostic on it. I am open to it. I'm constantly reading about this issue. And what I've found is that even if global warming were an issue, which it doesn't appear to be, we can't upend the world economy. We can't enforce like a zero carbon emission standard in this world, because we could do it. We could be like Juul with the vaping and take the flavors off the market. We could give ourselves a bit of a handicap to other countries we are competitive with, other continents, China, for instance. We could make ourselves less competitive with Russia by making ourselves force ourselves to use fuel sources that are not efficient, or that don't allow us to have enough power to continue the industry as we have since the Industrial Revolution. There are so many ways that this idea of climate change can disrupt the world economy. You can make the judgment for yourself how you feel, but in my world I persuade towards nuclear energy and cleaner forms of fossil fuel, trying to refine those processes. In the context of nuclear, I say we should look towards Generation 3 and Generation 4 nuclear power, because it does not melt down and it uses recyclable nuclear waste for fuel with yields as high as 90%. Go follow Sub Schneider on Twitter, Mark Schneider, who is an advocate for Generation 4 nuclear power, which is growing in popularity because it is not only efficient, but it is also, I believe, carbon neutral, or does not have carbon emissions. So if you have carbon guilt, and I have a video, carbon guilt, check it out, nuclear power could be the solution you're looking for. Because solar is great, and things like wind are cool, but they're also rather inefficient, and they have their own costs and benefits. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't see oil going anywhere anytime soon, but nuclear, for some of those larger applications, taking care of cities and towns, could be a great solution. And of course, they do have something called carbon capture, which you can actually put a carbon capture station next to your nuclear power plant, Generation 3 or 4, that's safer and you won't have any of those Chernobyl kind of situations. Chernobyl could be viewed as climate propaganda, by the way, if you'd like. And that way you're taking in the carbon from the air and using it and finding good applications for it that do not, if you believe in carbon polluting, pollute the environment. So, prophets of global warming persuade youth who haven't seen the past. They only know stories. They only know history, which is written by the winners. The people that have the power to put forth information, to create media that is viewed decades or even centuries later. And if you go centuries back on climate news, global warming, global cooling news, you will start to see why I'm a bit more agnostic. Definitely check out Tony Heller. He is a well-known climate skeptic. And of course, there are other websites, many, many others. Just put climate change into Google and you can find more information if you're a climate alarmist and you'd like to persuade in that direction. So these prophets persuade youth by saying they'll pay the cost. You'll pay the cost for our carbon sins 50 or 60 years from now, when the prophecy is fulfilled. So they say the modern religions, they do require, whether you're secular or non-secular, maybe even devoutly secular, they do require a bit of faith over reason. So they need you to look towards the future that you can't see. The past does not determine the future. You can't see the future, but you can just look at all the information that has happened before and make a determination of what's going to happen next. And of course, we have these models and these systems for determining what's going to happen with the climate. We have the Russian model, I believe it's called, I'm going to get this wrong, but you can look it up, INCM4 and 5. I might have had that wrong, but you can certainly look up Russian climate model and you will quickly come across the INCM4 and 5 that have predicted largely, predictably, accurately, what has been going on in terms of temperature and climate. But a number of these models have a lot of different calculations and people putting offsets in and doing all this stuff that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to reflect reality. It just, it accounts for certain things here. And really, I see the climate, I think it's a bit of an ego thing for us to think that we can control the climate. It's one of our great white whales that we can control the climate. And for me, I don't think we have enough information. There's underground volcanoes that might have warmed the water here and not warm it there. There's so many different considerations and factors that go into all these things. But of course, there is this overarching altruistic lens. Of course, moral virtue and universal truth are at stake here, right? So you have this idea, this sort of advocacy to say, well, maybe global warming or global cooling, climate change might not really be, in actuality, the biggest issue on the table. There might be other things out there, but we do want to persuade in an anti-pollution direction, and that is virtuous in my mind. So it's like it's directionally accurate. It's directionally accurate, but I don't think that we should be getting into a world where we're trying to teach our kids that doomsday is coming 8 years, 12 years from now, as AOC once said, but then said it was a joke. Yes, the modern religion of global warming is a joke, AOC. But this is creating a depression. We've had articles, we've had situations where people are getting depressed. Children are being depressed because they don't see a future. They're impressionable. They listen to the adults. They listen to the academics, the experts. And, there is no such thing as truly settled science. We get very close, but when you have experts saying, it's settled science, we are headed towards doomsday, what is a child going to do? Right? Are they going to say, nah, I think I'm going to continue watching Nickelodeon? Well, they might, if they're smart. But a lot of them are being persuaded in this direction that we really need to do something. And usually that something, unfortunately, involves governmental intervention, larger government, and a little thing that I like to call socialism. Yeah, raising taxes and saying, well, you can't do this. Authoritarianism. Okay, maybe not. Some might say socialism is not the greatest word for this, but they are trying to put socialism in. They're trying to raise your taxes and say, well, we need to build all this stuff, otherwise we're doomed. And meanwhile, the price of oil is a large indicator of how well the world economy is doing. And other countries aren't necessarily on board with our idea of what is morally or fiscally virtuous when it comes to climate. So, because youth crave agency but lack wisdom, this is all very convenient. Young people, many of them, I remember, they want to be like adults. They want to have importance. They want to have purpose and meaning, and they want to make a difference. They want to make a difference on the world, right? They want to make their mark. They want their existence to mean something. They crave agency. They want to make a change. They want to show their parents, show their friends, show their peers, show everybody else that they have done something good. And that's why virtue signaling is so popular among younger people, especially. They're not necessarily, aware of their moralistic tendencies, but they can still fall under the spell of a modern religion. And so they crave agency but lack the wisdom. They don't have the experience, the time on this earth to understand how much is truth and how much is fiction about these things. And so it's rather convenient, they're rather susceptible. And I say, of course, try to get as much information as possible. Don't get bogged down by labels. Ask a lot of questions if you can. Questions are good. And, labeling people alarmist or denier, whatever it might be, I think most of us, I like to think in a positive direction, an optimistic direction, that most of us are looking out for the best. They're looking out for other people. They're looking to make a better world, and they're thinking idealistically, they're looking at the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, and they're trying to avoid that. So I don't hold it against anybody if they believe one thing or another about this topic or any other. I have my bias and my preferences and my advocacy, which you can see on this channel, with new tweet videos every week or two, and then we have segments that are taken from the larger tweet video and made into more palatable forms. I do have my preferences, but I don't hold it against anybody if you disagree. I actually look forward to hearing your commentary below. And that's it for the video today. I thank you very much for watching. Hope you had a great time. If you enjoyed the content, please do leave me a like and a subscribe below. Get on board. If you didn't like the content and you want to respect meritocracy, give me a thumbs down. It'll help me with the algorithm. And of course, hit the little bell for notifications. Please do leave me a comment below with your thoughts, observations, accolades, and criticisms. I look forward to interacting with you. As always, I can be found at Real Jeff Tidwell on Twitter. I'm also on Minds, Gab, Parler, Telegram, and Instagram. If you're not watching this video on YouTube, you're watching it on BitChute. And as I always say, everything I said today might be wrong. Or everything I said today might be right. Or perhaps the truth lies between. Some of what I said might be wrong, and some of what I said might be right. I think that makes a little bit more sense. So once again, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time.